Good evening. A warm welcome to those attending this evening's Pension Committee meeting and also to those watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. My name is Councillor Reeta Chamdal and I will be chairing this meeting. Details of the business to be considered today shown on the agenda, copies of which are accessible online underneath the live broadcast. At the end of the public part of the meeting, the committee will move to discuss any confidential matters. The live broadcast on YouTube will then be cut and any members of the public present in the room will be asked to leave. Agenda items 1 to 10 will be considered in public, and then items 11 to 14 will be considered in private. General housekeeping. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm goes off, please follow officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. Also, polite reminder to please switch off any mobile devices to start the meeting before the meeting starts. Online housekeeping. Some important online housekeeping for those attending via MS Teams. Please ensure any mobile phones around you are on silent. Please keep your microphone muted when not speaking. Only one person may speak at a time, and I, as chairman, will call those to speak. Finally, remind anyone speaking today that your voice will be only audible online if your microphone is switched on. Okay, now we move on to part 1 of the agenda. Apologies for absence.
Apologies from Councillor Douglas Mills with Councillor Philip Cawthorne substituted.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Cawthorne. Just to let you know, Councillor Cawthorne will need to leave the meeting about 6 o'clock to continue our deputy mayoral duties. Thank you. Declarations of interest in matters coming before this meeting. None? Oh, sorry, Councillor Cawthorne.
Sorry to use that. That will cost me, won't it? Did you catch? Shall I say that again? We used to have to declare an interest where we were deferred members of the local government pension scheme. If we still have to, I so declare.
Okay, moving on to agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting on the 25th of September 2024. All agreed? Agreed. Lovely. And then just to confirm that items marked part 1 will be considered in public and those marked 2 will be considered in private, which are 11 to 14. Okay, moving on to agenda item 5, the administration report. Over to you, Tunde.
Thank you, Chair. This paper presents the administration performance by Hampshire, and as usual, they have performed 100% against KPIs. Sorry, they have performed 100% against KPIs. The portal sign-up has increased to 46%, as against 31% at the inception of the partnership with Hampshire. And the other significant thing to highlight is the backlog of cases. That's now down to 378, and the remaining 378 is being held up by lack of information from a particular payroll provider, which is being dealt with by both Hampshire and ourselves. So it's been a long haul, but we're almost there. And other things of interest are cybersecurity. The latest penetration test by Hampshire, which is a regular occurrence, was carried out on the 2nd of December. The results has not been communicated to us yet, but I will report that to committee at the March committee in 2025. In terms of benefit statements, 99% of the active benefit statements were sent out by the 31st of August deadline. That's the statutory deadline. So we are on point to deliver. We're not actually 100%, but again, the missing benefit statements as a result of lack of information or responses from 1 or 2 employers. So in terms of deferred membership, it's 99.99%, so that's almost 100%. And lastly, the registration on the portal for pensioners is now about 67%. That's registration, and those who have elected to get paper correspondence. So that's all the salient points from the administration. Any questions? I mean, Andy Lowe is around to add questions.
Councillor Mathis.
Thank you, Chair. And this is definitely, as always, a good report. And I'm pleased with that we continue to hit that Hampshire continues to hit the deadlines. It's fantastic. I was just going to ask, in terms of the statements being produced, and I know why it's been held up, but what's our statutory duty and requirement in terms of this? Because I'm assuming it has to be at 100% at some point. And we spoke in the past about the carrot and stick approach with employers not providing adequate data, whether it's through a third party or not. And I just wondered, is this an improvement, or is it just we've always had this kind of level of benefit statements being produced at the 99, which is, I'm not quibbling over, hundredths or whatever it might be, or tenths of a percent, but it would be useful to know kind of what's required of us and how we might be able to encourage those employers to do better for next year.
Thank you, Councillor Mathis. So as an employer, we're duty bound to provide a statement for everybody. So in a situation where we don't have updated information, we still have to produce a statement, but it will be a stale one, albeit what we produced the last time around, and inform the member that the reason they are receiving this old information is because their employer has failed in their obligations to provide us with the information, but we still have to produce something for them. Andy, am I right in asserting that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in theory there's a requirement to report to the TPR, isn't there? But I think when you're so close to 100%, generally the scheme wouldn't self-report because the numbers are negligible in terms of statements that have not gone out. So I think, as you say, yeah, you continue to work with employers to try and mop up the very small cohort of statements that have not yet been produced.
Right. So, sorry, Chair. It is recommended that the Pensions Committee notes the administration update.
I think we've got one more question from Councillor Hawthorne.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. I mean, an observation first of all. I mean, having been around for quite a long time on this committee before, I'm aware that this report reads very well compared to some of those we've seen in the past from past providers. So we had all that difficulty. One question I will ask is around officer time. Certainly a considerable amount of officer time was required to support with the previous provider. Would it be reasonable to assume that we're in a better place with that now in terms of the amount of officer time that's been taken up in providing support? Where are we in that regard, please?
Thank you, Councillor Corson. So, in terms of officers' times, we do spend less time engaging with either employers or members because Hampshire, as opposed to the last provider, are better resourced. And although we are paying a bit more than what we did then, but they are better resourced, and the allocation of resources is almost about perfect. So, our role now is just as an intermediary, where there's an impasse in terms of our members not getting what they want or they need information, so they will come to us. So there's less requirements on our time to deal with the day-to-day administration of the fund. So.
Thank you, if I may, through you, Chair. But it's good to see past decision making vindicated in that regard, anyway. So thank you. Lovely.
Do we note the administration update as a committee? Yes. Noted. on, isn't it? Moving on to agenda item 6, investment strategy and fund manager performance, part 1. Again, over to you, Tunde.
Thank you, Chair. So we've attached the report, and it's the dashboard reporting developed in conjunction with the London CIV. So it's supposed to make it easier for members to digest in terms of headlines, and it does give some more granular information as well. So we did ask for comments at the last committee meeting on both the positive and negative aspects of what members perceive, my members' perception is about the report. So one of them was that they wanted it printed in color, but unfortunately that is not very cost effective, so it's not being implemented. But I think initially they informed me that going forward we're only going to be getting there will be no printed version of it, so everybody will get a color version. And the headlines in these reports, the funding level is 100%, and the assets have marginally increased as well to 1.4 billion. In terms of performance, the performance wasn't as good as the last quarter, but it's still 1.3%, but just about 0.5% behind the benchmark. The 1 year it's a better result. It's 0.6 better than the benchmark. And 3 and 5 year returns are at 3.5 and 4.1% against the required returns, annualized returns, which is set in the funding strategy statement of 4.1. So the 3 years is 0.6 behind, whereas the 5 years is tracking the required annualized returns.
Any questions? Councillor Reeta?
Thank you, Chair. I know we're not meant to look quarter to quarter, and we know it's been quite a turbulent time over the last few years, which is why it would make sense that we would be slightly behind benchmark in some asset classes. I guess my question's more probably to Sylvia, if I may. Just in terms of performance management, how does the CIV, when times are, can I say times are slightly better? When things are performing in the right direction, just kind of what pressure is, or not pressure, what kind of performance monitoring? I know it's the same sort of process, but is there that, when we are behind benchmark over a few years, is there kind of a bit more of a, this is a time when people are thriving, you need to push a bit harder, or is it just taken as a kind of normal, run-of-the-mill sort of, we do the same standard monitoring every time? I guess in terms of performance management of the CIV, it would be useful to know when things are doing slightly better, if the pedal is pushed a bit harder, because I know that the pedal's pushed a bit hard when things are going in the wrong direction.
I think there are two things that we need to keep in mind. We have a monitoring process whereby we look at the managers that we appoint, and there is a monitoring status. So there is a monitoring status that we call normal, enhanced, and on watch. Irrespective of which monitoring status they are, we are having a very, very in-depth review of the manager once a year. We are having regular calls with them on a quarterly basis. There is a whole process to monitor. And when a manager is underperforming, it's not necessarily a trigger to deselect them. So performance is a very important part of the monitoring, but it's not the only thing. We look at the people, we look at the investment strategy, we look at the business. You can have a fantastic business and a great investment process, but if you don't execute it well, you can have a very bad performance as well. So all of these things take into account. Now, when you put a manager on enhanced monitoring, it means you want to scrutinize that further, But it's not because the performance is improving that you're not going to scrutinize just as much. On the contrary, I think when managers are doing better, you have regular dialogues to really enforce stewardship, to look at things that they are doing. So there are things that our investment team monitor on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, and these things are regular, and they will always happen. And there's also the qualitative part that goes on top of that, because, you know, the market dynamics change a lot, and you just want to make sure that whatever manager you appoint to do a certain job, that they stick to that job, and they're doing what it says in the tin. And you don't want them just moving the strategy as markets move. So there are many different facets that you need to address when you are monitoring the manager. And although performance is really important, it's not a trigger to push forward the pedal or release it. You know, you have to have this steady pace when you're monitoring. And it's irrespective if they're doing well or not so well. You need to understand what they are doing, and markets are dynamic.
Councillor Cawthorne.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, if I may, through you, Chair, I think, Sylvia, I agree that one can never be trigger happy with fund managers. One knows that you can never be quite sure if you've jettisoned one whether the next one will be any better, regardless of past performance. But the way I read Councillor Mather's question a moment ago was perhaps less about that, more about our ability as a local authority to get a firm handle on the performance management of individual fund managers within the CIF in the context of the wider CIF environment when there are multiple local authorities involved. This was always a concern, when the CIF came into being, and the requirement was for us to invest in that. The question was, okay, well, how do we keep a hand on it and make sure we can pull the right lever at the right time when we need to? So I suppose it's, for me, if I understood you correctly, that's more the question, really. And I'd be interested in your response to that, please, in the light of what we're hearing.
Of course, and I think it's really important because you haven't been with this committee for a year or so, and you haven't seen all the progress and the development that the London CIV has gone through in the last few years. And you will be able to attest even by Roger, who attends regular webinars with us now, that we foster a greater access for all local authorities to have contact with the fund managers, to meet, to express their concerns, to ask their questions. You know, you as part of your training policy now, you have regular calls with the London CIV, not only to know about the progress of what we're doing as an organization, but more importantly, the investor update calls when we have a governance process whereby our investment team is doing the due diligence on all the funds that we oversee, and that gets scrutinized in our investment committee, and then it gets communicated to partner funds. And these calls are open to all investors and all members of your pension committee, pension chairs, of investment, independent advisors. And these calls, when they happen, they also get recorded. So even people who have day jobs and cannot attend in certain times, that is made available to them. So we have greater transparency about the process and what are the steps we're doing to strengthen and to improve the manager selection and the manager monitoring because of some underperforming funds that we have. But also, we have a greater dialogue and we grant much more access to the LGPS community in London as a whole, because all these investors, they get access to all the managers that they invest through the London CIV.
your question, Councillor Cawthorne?
If you'll just indulge me just for a moment, that's good to hear. I mean, my only concern was, well, we have concerns as a local authority that our voice isn't sort of watered down by the totality of local government involvement across London, that's all. But it sounds like we've got a pretty robust mechanism, so that's helpful. Thank you.
And if I may, this is not just purely investment, but above all through stewardship and the enhancements that we think about our funds to drive decarbonization pathway. So on Friday, for example, there is a call that is the Sustainability Working Group that they meet every 3 months, and there has been invites to members of your pension committee to participate on that and to form part. And we also take into account the voices of all partner funds that we have when it comes to, produce our stewardship policies or climate change policies and other things that will influence the way we design the products and we monitor the managers.
Just a quick question for the committee. Do you receive emails and invitations to the weekly calls? Yeah? Yeah, lovely. Tunde?
May we just excuse Andy, please?
Yes. Oh, apologies, Andy.
No, that's okay. Thank you, Chair. I shall hope to see you at our next committee meeting.
Lovely. Thank you.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Any other questions? Marion?
I had sort of 2 points, if that's okay. One of the criticisms, because I'm an independent for several London funds, as you know, and one of my other clients, their concern around the CIV was that, in terms of appointing managers and their performance, there needs to be 3 elements to that. So the first is your initial appointment, the second is the ongoing monitoring, and then the third is a flexible and dynamic approach when something isn't going wrong. And that's not necessarily underperformance, because a manager might be underperforming for good reason. You might have a value manager in a growth environment, for example. And I did meet with my other client and the CIV 2 weeks ago, was it? And was talked through by the interim chief investment officer about the new process that they'll be rolling out in future, and having a sub list of managers that they have there to potentially replace quite quickly any manager that they've got concerns about. And I believe that will be communicated more widely in the new year. Is that correct? So, and then the second was a comment, which was to thank the CIV for the report, which, again, you as a committee, or Tunde really, and James, put a lot of effort into coming up with this, and I believe that you're the first client to regularly get this, and I did feedback some comments to Sylvia and the team last month, and they've made some changes to that. So.
Andrew from ICIO.
Yeah, so no questions to me, it's just 2 comments. So I think another angle to the question that was being asked is oversight. So I think there's an element of confidence and independent oversight of the pool, so not just the CIV but all the pools, to kind of have a confidence that they're making the right calls, doing the right things. So I think that's one element to it, and I think as more assets get transferred to the pool, that'll become more important over time. So Hillingdon is on the whole invested, so 80% or so, but at some point it will be 100% invested, and then it becomes kind of top priority at that point. So that's another angle. The only other thing I was going to comment on was on page 27. So, and this is with one eye on the valuation coming up. So next actual valuation date is March 25. And if I think back to the conversation at the previous valuation date when we were looking at strategy, it was about the funding level had hovered around 80% or so for quite a while. It was 88%, I think it has the figure here, 88% at March 22. And the conversation at that point was, how do we drive growth to get to 100% and beyond? And actually, as things stand, this report's showing that the funding level is 120% as of today. So that's a really good result. So I think we should just take a minute to say that's a good outcome. And then obviously feeding into the March 25 valuation, hopefully the position will be as strong as it is today.
Councillor Methers.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question and then one questioning myself and my thinking. On page 31, we have a table that shows kind of performance against benchmarks. There's a number in brackets, and I know that sometimes the brackets indicate that we may have taken out some cash from some assets, for example. And I just wondered, am I misreading the table, or can someone just give me some very simple English in terms of what I should be looking at here when it's in brackets?
Page 31. So I think, if I may, I think the brackets indicate the relative performance. So where the brackets are the numbers in red, so that means it's negative, I think, rather than any cash flows.
Will cash coming out of funds impact the negative red performance?
It shouldn't. So it's kind of adjusted for that.
Sorry, that was the main one, Chair. I wanted to check that I was making sure that when someone took some money out, then it wasn't impacting that performance monitoring. The other one was obviously we've had quite a change in pensions with inflation in terms of liabilities and discount rates, etc. How easy is it going to be to judge from valuation to valuation the kind of fund performance and just the kind of funding levels?
I could maybe have a stab at that one. So I think so the key thing that will have changed. So if we go back to that page 27, you can see quite clearly there that the assets have gone up. So at the point of the last valuation, so not having the exact figure to hand, but it was just under £1 billion in assets, 1.4 billion today. So asset value's gone up. But as you say, there's another side to the equation, which is the liabilities. The two key things that affect the liabilities is the discount rate, but also the level of inflation, because the liabilities are linked to inflation and uncapped. Inflation has moved around, but that's mostly been short-term inflation. Long-term inflation tends to be a lot more stable, so I wouldn't expect a significant difference in that between the two valuation dates. The big thing that has changed is the discount rate has stepped up quite significantly as base interest rates have come up. So that's good news for liabilities. It means a lower figure. So all in all, I think it's probably a slightly more positive environment for the liability figure, hence why we're seeing a higher funding level today.
Thank you. Councillor Cawthorne.
Just a quick supplementary on what I was asking earlier. One of the things I'm used to historically with this reporting is a sort of an at-a-glance fund manager, sort of, last quarter, previous quarter, year, etc., just to get a flavour of performance over time. For context, exactly because we don't make knee-jerk reactions to one bad quarter, for example. I can't actually see that here now. Maybe that I've only just had the papers. It may be that it is here. Do we actually report in that way? Do we have that information? Can you refer me to the correct page then, please? Okay, fine. To include that point then, I mean, again, in my experience, we're normally in a position where if there are concerns being flagged by our professional advisor team, then it's quite clear that perhaps some action is required. So my question is, are we being reported to still in that way? Not that you would necessarily be recommending action on our part, but if you were, it would be there for us to see, is my question. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cawthorne. I think just to clarify as well, since I've been chair this year, we and while we had James on board as well, and I think Tunde and I do regularly speak as well, where a fund isn't performing, we have had discussions in park committees, and we have raised it. We have said, no, this fund isn't performing. And only this week, I think Sylvia sent me out a message as well, and Izzy do regularly get in touch with us. So from my perspective as chair, as a new chair as well, I think I've been kept pretty well updated on any performance issues that we have. I think because obviously you've missed a few, Councillor Cawthorne, it might not be readily available to you. But no, thank you for pointing it out. It's only something that we can always check and reflect on each meeting. Thank you. Any other questions? No. Moving on to agenda item 7. I think I've lost you. We've had so many questions. Agenda item 7, responsible investment.
Thank you, Chair. So this agenda item provides information on the ESG activities of our fund managers and the voting metrics as well, plus information, well, extensive information on their engagement activities, which you can find in reports located on the shared drive for members who need more information. So well, it is recommended that committee note the fund manager's ESG activities and their compliance efforts, and note the LCIV and the LAPFF activities. I believe Councillor Mathers attended the LAPFF conference last week or something, and he has an update to
just for the viewers online. Councillor Mathers represents the committee on LAPFF issues, so would you like to give a brief update, Councillor Mathers?
Absolutely, and thank you, Liz, for allowing it to be verbal. I will circulate a fuller report to members and officers after the meeting. I haven't had a chance, I'm afraid, with a busy weekend. In terms of the theme of the training conference, it is definitely an opportunity to learn so much around the ESG movements. It was all about standing firm, but actually one of the hot topics of it was around the Mansion House stuff and the stewardship generally of and governance of the local government pension fund. So it was useful to be amongst kind of colleagues across the country who are asking similar questions, which I'm sure we'll discuss later. As a whole, I think that you can see how LAFT is working with the pools in terms of making sure that, and vice versa, to make sure there's a consistent approach to stewardship, to ESG issues. I think there was definitely a few highlighted around kind of the energy industry, and I suppose more relevant to us being so close to Heathrow, the aviation industry, and things looking at sustainable fuels, somewhere there's been good transition from fossil fuels, and somewhere where the progress hasn't been sufficient. But LAFT is predominantly concentrating on engagement and working with, and then also things around a greater diversity amongst boards and other governance issues that are very pertinent. I think, if I may make two comments, I hopefully don't get me in trouble with the global economy, but I think it's quite clear that the tones from the US are meaning that some funds and some companies are feeling that they have more of an opportunity to abandon some of the commitments around climate transition and around sustainability generally. What has come to the fore, and which has been good to see, is the natural capital. So where there's a lot more discussion now around kind of sustainable forestry and kind of natural earth stuff, and not just focusing on kind of carbon or carbon capture, carbon credits, which I don't particularly think is a solution myself, but it's not just focused on one area. It is clear though that with so many issues around kind of remuneration, workers' rights, and a number of different social issues, that it could be quite distracting, I think, for those trying to make change and to engage companies, particularly in equities, on certain issues, that there are so many issues that sometimes it's difficult to have a clear focus on what part of ESG is the most pertinent. So I think very much our role here, from looking at our value statements over the last few years and the issues that are most important to us, it's important that we get our voice across to the CIV and to funds about what is our priority. And I do think things like engaging in the sustainability calls, it will be quite a good way of us all contributing to making sure that the Hillingdon Fund's voice is heard, and that members are having the opportunity to put forward Hillingdon's perspective on not just fund management performance and best value for money in terms of fund fees, but also on the ESG stuff. So I will circulate some more detailed stuff in writing in the next few days, so that the committee can read a bit more about the conference.
Thank you, Councillor Madison, for taking the time, and look forward to your notes. Any other questions on agenda item 7? Councillor Cawthorne.
You won't ask me to sub again, will you?
Always a pleasure, Councillor Cawthorne, so yes.
Again, LAPFF, obviously we went back into it a few years ago, and of course, as I've always understood it, the LAPFF look at these ESG issues and make recommendations, as I understand it, in terms of best practice, in terms of voting behaviour, that we then look to see whether our investors actually abide by, I suppose. And I hope I've got all that right. Perhaps Oswald will correct me if I haven't. But page 50, we've got a table which is quite interesting, because we've got a voting breakdown for Q3, and I'm just intrigued by what it really what we're taking from that, because we've got the London Civ, we've got Rufford, Bailey Gifford, Elgin, and we're talking about number of votes with and against. I just wonder what we're supposed to take from that, really. Are we taking it that they're reasonably exercising their judgment as investors in taking account of what's coming out of LAPFF? I just wonder how we read what's presented to us there and what we make of it. Thank you.
Sylvia.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is a very fascinating topic, because it brings a lot of partner funds interest into it. So a few years ago, we partnered with Hermes EOS to become our stewardship partner. They are a very large organization. They cover stewardship activities across the globe. They have a lot of presence in other areas where LAPF don't have. LAPF tends to do a lot of engagements. There are with companies that are multinationals or international, but they tend to be companies domiciled in the FTSE, by the FTSE 100, whereas Hermes EOS has a much greater scope. So to give you an idea, we might get voting alerts from LAPF around 100 companies, but your passive investments in LGIM or in other investments will have like 4,000 or 1,500 holdings in one fund. So it's nice for you to have not only LAPF but also have Hermes EOS. And the way we do that is we take on board the guidelines from all our partner funds, and that gets informed into the way we shape our voting guidelines, and they vote accordingly. We have a full-time responsible investment manager monitoring all these stewardship activities in the London TIV and looking at these votes, and she receives those vote alerts from LAPF. And in the instance that we decide to do a vote against LAPF recommendation, there is a process in place where the CIO and the head of responsible investment and the responsible investment manager, they will have a small meeting, they will discuss the rationale, they will document it. And every 6 months in your investment report, we have a summary on the very few instances where we would vote against LAPF recommendation. This is done in a systematic way but on average per year we're doing like 10,000 votes, and we might get like 5 votes that we might vote slightly different than LAPF. The other thing that it's really important to consider in this stewardship is that you harmonize the votes. Because we are doing the votes on your behalf for all the funds across the London CIV, if fund managers have the same holdings, they not necessarily be voting on the same way. And if you were by yourself, you would be like appointing fund managers to manage your portfolios, and they would just vote according to their beliefs. And you could have votes just going one against each other. But because you go through the pool, your voice in shaping those voting guidelines is much higher than if you are competing with other institutional investors in the market. It's tailor-made for the LGPS, and it's done in an harmonized way where you can be investing in Ruffer, and you can get an equity in Ruffer in a Ruffer fund, an equity in a Bailey Gifford fund, and this will be voted exactly the same way in a harmonized way. So I think this is an improvement to be able to reflect your views in all the investments you have in your portfolio.
Councillor Bowles, or which one was first, sorry? Councillor Bowles.
Thank you. Just on the Bailey Gifford, all I ever hear is bad things about Bailey Gifford, about their ethos, etc., and how they're part owned in fossil fuel, in fuels, etc. And I just hear bad publicity about them and about some of their investments in the Far East, in the Middle East, rather. Have we got anything to say about Bailey Gifford?
Well, they have businesses in the Middle East. They probably have Middle Eastern institutional investors, but they also have a lot of U.S. investors, European investors. I think they got embroiled into a kind of like a PR issue with the Edinburgh festivals, and that got a lot of attention from the media, but in a very unawarded way, because we think they have very good responsible investment capabilities. They invest a lot of their effort and capital to have very robust responsible investment team. They do a lot of engagement. They partnered in the past and led a lot of engagements with Petrobras, with CRH, which is a cement company, and they really push forward a sustainability agenda across many of the investee companies they have in their portfolios. But you are quite right, they had a lot of bad media coverage with people trying to refuse their sponsorship to the Edinburgh Summer Festival because of their alleged exposure to fossil fuels. Mind you, I do think they invest in fossil fuel or cement high metering companies, but that is really to drive stewardship and to drive pressure and allow them to have a dialogue with these companies to really make a difference in the real world, rather than just abstain from investing in these high emitters. So they would, for example, in your fund, they will invest in Ryanair, and they believe that Ryanair is one of the early entrants that are going to benefit from a lot of the future contracts they made for sustainable fuel for aviation, and that's one of the reasons why they have an exposure to Ryanair. They would invest in cement companies, and they would say, they also investing in these companies because they are the picks and shovels of a transition to a lower carbon economy. And, when you have wind turbines, you're going to need concrete. When you invest in mining, you're going to need those minerals to invest in semiconductors. So it's all very linked, and it's very complex to just, it's not as simple as it seems to just, exclude the investments. So I hope I provide you some reassurance, but we'll be happy to invite you to our next Meet the Manager webinar with Bailey Gifford, so then maybe you can express your concerns directly to the manager.
Thank you, Sylvia. Councillor Method.
Thank you. I have some general comments around the table, but while we're on Bailey Gifford, it frustrates me then that when they know that they're trying to invest in, or portray that they're investing in transition, that they're then withdrawing from some of the quality standards and labels that are the very kind of global recognition of the work that you're doing when it comes to sustainability and environment. And I know the CIV has been having conversations with them about this. Again, it sounds like that they've been put on pressure by some of their other investors in order to come out of these. And I find that genuinely concerning, and other words that make me feel very frustrated, that when you've got a fund that it says it's trying, or a manager that's trying to invest in such things, that then the very thing that would protect them from that reputational damage, they're running away from. It'd be useful on those comments. If I just may, with the voting, a lot of the voting table often talks about kind of resolutions, and a lot of the left progress has been around where there have been groups of investors that have put in resolutions in order to change some practice of a company. And although they don't always, well, they very rarely win those votes, it does send a message to those boards that maybe they should start to think about their practice in that area, whether it be, diversity of a board, for example, or carbon neutral. It would be really useful, I think, with this table. You can vote against anything in a board, in an AGM, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything. It just means you voted against. I don't know if there's a simple way, and I did speak to LGIM sustainability officers about this, of having kind of categories. So did they vote against a governance issue? Did they vote against a remuneration issue? Did they vote against the climate impact issue? So that then we can get a sense of what these votes are against. Because when we spoke particularly to LGIM, their value base is huge, and they're serving a huge number of investors. And they have very complicated, and I've read some of them, policies, which is great because it informs their voting, and it is better when it's Paris aligned, for example. It is better pushing us towards the sustainability we want to see. But my concern is we don't often know which parts or what categories of ESG they're voting against or voting with when it comes to a resolution. So if there is any way of either nudging them to do that work for us, nudging the CIV to do some of that work, so it's just a clear table. So just like we were looking at kind of performance management in a way that's a lot more concise, that might be a nice concise way. I am also very appreciative of the stories and examples that are put in this, because that makes it look real. So if I can just then, we go back to the question on Bailey Gifford. I also wondered if you had any comment on split voting and whether that would be something the CIV could offer each fund in the future.
Okay, well, I'll start with the stewardship reporting, because it's an easy and quicker answer. We do have in our website, under stewardship, we publish every quarter a fact sheet from Hermes EOS, which provides you exactly the breakdown that you are after, showing which kind of types of votes, sometimes how they align to sustainable development goals, and if they are for governance, if they are for environmental issues, or if they are for labor, human rights issues. That is very easily extractable. But remember, this is a report that is done across all our public market funds. So another thing that we do for you, and we report on a quarterly basis, and it's part of your really long investment report, and Tandy has that, and it's in your report pack, is we give you a snapshot every quarter of the votes that happen in that quarter, and in which categories they fall into it. So you can very easily see that. But remember, these votes are seasonal. So a lot of them happen in April or like November. So you might get a couple of quarters that it looks really light, and others that you have a lot of numbers in a lot of categories. So this is the answer I have for you on the stewardship, because this report is already available to you. It just says how you get access to it. On the Bailey Gifford, I mean, you all know that it's been already in the press. They also approached us to communicate to us their withdrawal from the Climate Action 100 membership, as well as the Net Zero Asset Management Initiative. And although they say that the role that they played alongside these organizations will not change, and that they will continue to drive their stewardship agenda. They felt that they didn't have any other choice rather than leave because of pressures from some U.S. institutional investors. I know this is not an acceptable answer for you or for other partner funds who are equally frustrated, just like you. But one thing I would like to bring to your attention is that the fund that you have, that Bailey Gifford invests, it's a Paris-aligned fund. And there are, in these policies and the way the fund is being designed, there are contractual arrangements with the London CIV and Bailey Gifford on the way they will look at the carbon budget of this strategy, the way they will engage and do the stewardship, and that hasn't changed. But one thing that although we believe that they look at ESG and responsible investment as a central thesis of the way they invest money, I think what we can do as monitoring them is to ensure that the amount of capital they allocated to those engagements via Climate Action 100 and NZIM initiatives is that they continue to deploy and that they continue to be committed to that responsible investment team. So one of the things that we do in our monitoring on a regular basis is to monitor the amount of investment they're doing with that team, how many people are working in that team, what kind of activities that they are driving, to make sure that regardless of them being part of these initiatives or not, that they will not, pay less attention to something that they would otherwise would have been doing if they were members of these initiatives.
Happy with that, Councillor Moses? Yeah. Do you have a...
I was going to say, so we've recently done a full due diligence on the strategy, so investment and ESG, and this news came out towards the end of that process. So we've got views on it, but I'd probably curtail what I'd say in the public section. Maybe we could talk about it a bit more in the private section, if that would make sense.
Thank you, Sylvia. I did receive your email, so I have noted it. I think, as Andrew highlighted, we will probably discuss it more in part 2. Moving on. Yeah. Okay, agenda item 8, Tunde. Risk register.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this agenda item presents the risk register of the pension fund. As requested at the last committee meeting, I've moved 2 of the retired risks. As just a quick recap, we migrated all our risks onto a new system called JCAD, provided by the London Borough of Hillingdon. So this it's a different system on how risks are viewed. So day-to-day managed risk, active risks, are classified separately from risks that have been identified and can be packed aside and are seen to be low risk. So I think Councillor Mathers requested that a couple of those risks be reactivated the last time. So these were the PENS 9 and 10, liquidity on asset management and liquidity on members' dealings. So these have been reactivated and they have been actively monitored as requested. So what I'm presenting here is for committee to consider and agree the risk register in terms of approach and note the revised agreed format of the retired risk and those which remain open.
Councillor Mathers.
I just have one request, Chair, if I may. I wondered if in part 2 we could just get a little bit of an understanding of the mitigations and current arrangements when it comes to Pen 13 on key officer risk due to recent changes. I just wondered it would be useful for the committee to find out, but I think best as a part 2.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Mathers. I was going to just run through it now, but quite rightly we do it in part 2. Okay. Any other questions? No? So is the committee agree the risk register in terms of its approach and agreed with retired risks? All agreed? Agreed. Love that. Okay. Moving swiftly onto agenda item 9, governance.
Thank you, Chair. This agenda item presents the proposed pension committee meeting dates for 25-26, and I've been informed by Anisha that this is to be confirmed when approved by the full council, which is January 16th. January 16th. So that will be confirmed once it's been approved by the full council. In addition, there is the latest information in this agenda item on committee CPD progress, and I'm happy to say that Councillor Chamdal has up to 33 hours completed training already, which is far ahead of everybody else. And just as a reminder that committee members are committed to 14 hours of training annually. So
14.
14, yes.
14.
Yes. This item also covers the committee training and work plan for 24-25, and it's open to suggestions on what members would like to see added to it for the last quarter, which is up till March 2025. And lastly, the very important addition to this paper is the General Code of Practice compliance updates. So you will see the GCOP snapshot dashboard on our analysis, and we've had a second pair analysis which was undertaken by Marion to highlight areas of non-compliance or lack of full compliance. So moving on from that, officers have produced a work plan which is aimed at ensuring we are compliant by the statutory deadline of September 2025. That is attached to this paper as well. So the recommendations are that committee notes the proposed committee meeting dates for 25-26 and make suggestions on future agenda items. Note committee continuous professional development update and note the GCOP update. Thank you.
Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Chair. So I don't intend to comment on every single bit of everything, but I noticed in this, I'm struggling to find it, but I can read my notes that I've put down. So I believe it was in the governance on the dashboard. There is a, when it came to the pension committee, there were comments around kind of the requirements of pension committees and looking, when it came to kind of appointing councillors. I think that's in part of this section. And my only comment was that there are a limited number of councillors, so as the pension committee has to be made up of by councillors, it's going to be increasingly hard with the number of councillors to find the right people who are fully ready for it ahead of them being appointed to the committee. So I wondered if the wording could be changed so it reflects something similar to maybe the licensing or planning committee. So whereby you have to complete a certain amount of training with planning or with licensing before you can sit on that committee. So I wondered if, instead of it being a kind of complicated, so let's say the next election cycle becoming very complicated if there were new members who needed to be added because of electoral results, the same conditions could be applied similar to the planning and licensing, where yes, these councillors are going to be on the committee, but they have to complete mandatory training before taking part. Now, I know that our mandatory training is a long one, but actually, if there was an abridged version, or at least a way in which and the dates of the new, like after AGMs and stuff, may need to be further away for pensions committee, but that people fulfil those requirements before they sit on it. I think that may be a new way of doing it that would help, and it's a very similar way to the way they do it for licensing and planning. And the other suggestion I was going to make with the training plan is a lot of the guidance talks about how we should identify kind of areas we're weak in from our individual assessment, and then do the appropriate modules. I wondered if that needs to be a little bit more mandated, actually, that from our reports, I'm sure we're humble enough to receive an email that says, please can you repeat this module because it was a weak area, or actually, do you want to have a conversation about this area of the pension committee and role because it was a weakness within your kind of assessment, and just a little bit more kind of a push for us, because I think we obviously, you see from the papers, there's a huge amount to go through, and I'm not saying that we can't find our own training and do it, but I think sometimes being told, please complete this by this date, in terms of a module, because it was one of your individual weaknesses, might just get us a little bit more compliant. I'm also concerned that there's no way of tracking, because I don't think we have a platform or plans to get a platform of who's, like, it's done on an honesty jar, which I think with councillors that's a great thing to do, but sometimes having a monitoring platform that says, we know you've completed this module and you've done it by this date, now you need to renew it a year later, it would be quite a helpful tool if it wasn't too expensive.
Marion.
I note what you say about councillors. When we get to talk later about the consultation, training for committee members, I think, will become mandatory in a legal perspective in the same way that it is for the pensions board. So we'll need to think about that anyway. I agree it's a good idea to have a prompt for individual councillors on their area of weaknesses, and maybe Tundi and I can have a chat about that later. And I can't comment on the cost or not of again, I'll leave that with Tundi, but quite a few of my clients do use a system, and it does automatically say this person did this module, and so there's a record there rather than the honesty box, as it were.
Councillor Cawthorne.
Just a quick question from me. The table on page 8 lists a number of different training interventions, courses, what have you. I'm wondering if this is based on a predetermined competency framework for what we see as an appropriate skill set, if you like, for a committee member. Have we arrived on that, bearing in mind that there are various ways of learning new things, and we learn differently, of course. Some of us are great at modular courses, others like to read, so I suppose it's taking account of different learning styles and different levels of aptitude to begin with, really, so I suppose it's just something to think about, really. So, yeah, my question was really how we arrived at that list. Thank you.
Right, so the work plan and the list is a result of extensive consultation between officers and the advisors. So in terms of learning styles, I don't think that played a major part, to be quite honest. I stand to be corrected in coming up with this. But what we've tried to do is try and cover as many of the requisite areas of knowledge that will be useful to all committee members, which is what we've included here. But from my experience, I think there are a lot of different ways that members can pick up knowledge about the functions they perform here. And a lot of them are provided by, I think, the London CIV and other providers, simply via seminars, updates online, which does not require having to sit down and read through masses of text and try to retain them, but you've just been drip-fed information which could be easily retained. So it's a hybrid of combination of having to go through the Aeon toolkit, which has specific information on what you need to know about financial markets and all other aspects. But then again, you could go to a CIV, you could log on to the CIV briefing, and you will be drip-fed information. You can ask questions. So we hopefully, along with myself and Marion and probably Ezio, will try and at least put into consideration your suggestion in terms of learning styles.
I'm conscious of time, Councillor Cawthorne. Yes. Yep. No. Thank you for your input today. Thank you. Just on the training, bearing in mind we may have to change it. It might become regulatory, so I think we could hold the thought on some of the ideas, because if it goes that way, and depending on the timescales, then I think we would have answered your question, Councillor Methods, on there. Can I also just encourage the committee, I don't always get a chance to update Tunde if any of you guys have attended any CIV monthly meeting calls, or Councillor Bills and I went on a half-day training workshop in London, didn't we? So if you do, just let us know. Let Tunde know so he has an updated version as well, and then also just copy me in so I'm aware. But I think we're not doing too bad with the training. I think no. Okay. Any other questions? No. Are we happy to therefore agree the recommendations? Agreed. And then if we have any other training that we want to do or any other activities, we'll give you an update, Tunde. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So the attached report is just is the Pension Fund Annual Report, which statutorily has to be published by December. I'm not sure the exact date in December, but early part of December. So this is attached for committee to approve, and I've also included the external auditor's audit plan for 23-24, which will look at what is contained in the annual report. That's the pension fund accounts and the annual report as well. So the recommendation is to approve the draft annual report and note the audit plan and the fees proposed to be charged by the external auditor. Just a quick recap of what the auditors are looking at in the accounts. There are four main areas, and the most important risks. And the first one is the misstatement due to fraud or error. Then the second one, which they have paid a lot of attention to and is being classified as a significant risk, is the evaluation of level 3 assets. So level 3 assets are assets that are sort of alternative assets like private equity, private debt, which are not readily traded on open exchanges. So the evaluation of such assets are quite opaque sometimes, because there is a lot of observable inputs, unobservable inputs into them. So they pay particular attention to the risk in it is that it might actually overvalue the assets of the pension fund, or undervalue it, depending on how the manager undertakes the valuation. So they do an extensive sort of work on this, and the same thing for the level 2 and level 3 assets as well. And the last one is the actuarial present value of promised retirement benefits, just to make sure the value of the retirement benefits being shown is commensurate with what they think is actually is. So they're doing a lot of investigations into that as well. So thank you, Chair.
Well, there's quite a lot to go through on there. Any questions? Are we happy with the report and agree? Yep. Okay. Agreed. Okay. So we have now finished the public part of the meeting. The committee will shortly move to a private session to discuss matters that are confidential in nature.